Okay. Yes. So, as we discussed yesterday and day before yesterday, Clint Brooks was an American teacher and critic whose work was important in establishing the new criticism. And Clint Brooks stresses on close reading and structural analysis of literature. He was the pioneer figure in new criticism, and he talked about close reading, that a text should be read in itself, and there should be sufficient attention to different aspects of the text, and the meaning of a text lies in its structural analysis. Means if you want to understand a text, you should go to the use of irony, paradoxes, contradictions, the kind of language you use in the text, etc. Clint Brooks was educated at Vanderbilt University, Nashville, and at Tulane University, New Orleans. He was a Rhodes Scholar, which is a very famous uh, NGO which supports scholars all over the world. Before he began teaching at Louisiana State University, Baton Rouge in 1932. From 1935 to 1942, with Charles W. Pippin and poet and critic Robert Penn Warren, he edited the Southern Review, which was a very famous journal, and it was devoted to new criticism, and he published works of new generation of Southern writers. Brooks' critical works include Modern Poetry and Tradition, which was published in 1939, and The Well-Wrought Urn from this present essay has been taken, which was published in 1947. He wrote many college texts which popularized new criticism among student community. There were other famous texts like Understanding Poetry, Understanding Fiction, Understanding Drama, which he completed with many other fellow colleagues of his own time. Now let us try to understand what is paradox. In literature, paradox is a literary device consisting of the anomalous juxtaposition of incongruous ideas for the sake of striking exposition or unexpected insight. It means, first thing, paradox juxtaposes opposite things. Secondly, this bringing together of opposite ideas give us unexpected insights or a striking explanation. Exposition means explanation. Anomalous means which have no connection with each other. Incongruous means which do not fit with each other. So paradox is a literary device, basically, which puts together two opposite ideas. And these opposite ideas are found to have some explanation which seems surprising to us, which seems contradictory to us, but when we go deep into this combination of opposite ideas, we are sent to the meaning it gives to us. Paradox functions as a method of literary composition and analysis. It can be used as a tool for analysis of literature, which involves examining apparently contradictory statements and drawing conclusions either to reconcile them or to explain their presence. So, paradox is used by literary critics, particularly new critics, because it puts together opposite statements and gives conclusions, and these conclusions confirm that these ideas can exist together. They have some similarity, they have some congruence, and thus they reveal a new, unexpected insight into the nature of things. Paradox in poetry means that tension at the surface of a verse can lead to apparent contradictions and hypocrisies. When you apply this tool in analyzing poetry, you find that poetry has a complex structure, and paradox makes us aware about these complex structures, right? Paradox makes us aware that poetry is not simply a collection of certain facts. Poetry is about different levels. Poetry is about different meanings inherent within the text. And these meanings, these surfaces, levels, they are discovered through paradox. That's why we say that it makes us aware about the multiplicity of meanings inherent in the text. It makes us aware that text has multi-layered structure. It's more or less like an onion. As you peel an onion, you find different layers therein. Similarly, as you go deep into poetry, you find that there are different levels, and these different levels, they are sometimes in opposition to each other, while at other times they carry, you know, on the similar vein, they carry a similarity, and the similarity is explained through the putting together of these different meanings. What are different ideas which are there in the language of paradox introduced by Clement Brooks? In the language of paradox, Clement Brooks takes on the language of poetry, stating that at its core, poetry is the language of paradox. This is a huge statement which Clement Brooks makes here. He says that paradox is inherent in all poetry, that paradox is core of the poetry. You cannot understand the poem without understanding the play of paradoxes within that poem. Brooks bases his position on the contradiction that are inherent in poetry, and his feelings that if those contradictions didn't exist, then neither would some of the best poetry we have today. He doesn't consider paradoxes as weaknesses of poetry. He doesn't think that if there are paradoxes within a poem, it means the poem is weak, or the poet has not been able to give meaning to the poem which he wanted to give, or the poem is a simple one. He says that without paradoxes, a poem cannot exist, because this is what gives strength to poetry. And good poetry always have a lot of paradoxes within it. Clement Brooks argues that poetry is made up of language of paradox, meaning that poetry is made up of a dynamic balance of opposite ideas, attitudes, and feelings. So it's very clear that the language of poetry is the language of paradox. And it means, this statement means that within a poem, there is a balance of opposite ideas. There are different streams within a single poem. And these different streams give multiple meanings, multiple layers to the poem. These streams might seem to be consisting of opposing ideas, attitudes, and feelings. But these opposing ideas and attitudes and feelings does not mean that the poet does not know his craft. It simply means that a poet is able to give a multivocality, a multi-layered structure to the text, and thus, while the poem undoes itself, at the same time it makes for its structure. These contradictions and these oppositions are part of the poem's structure. They are what poem is made up of. In the language of paradox, Brooks maintains that the true function of literary criticism is first to understand and then to analyze the organic nature of poetry. So Clement Brooks tells us that the function of criticism is to understand and analyze the organic nature of poetry. As we have talked in earlier lectures also, poem has got an organic structure. There are different elements within the composition of the poem, and these different elements, in a way, they make up a complex structure in an organic way. Organic is opposed to artificial or imposed one. A good poem has an organic structure, means different elements, they reconcile and sometimes they remain in opposition to each other, but ultimately there is a kind of unity in the poetry. This unity is a combination of these different elements. So there is an organic nature in a good poem, and this organic nature is to be analyzed by critics. In his opinion, words, vivid images, rhyme, rhythm, meter, and thought content are the various elements which combine themselves in the making of a poem. So these are different constituents of a poem, and these elements combine to create a poem. Brooks asserts it is function of criticism to analyze the internal relationship of these different elements which go into making of a poem. So it is function of criticism to see what kind of relationship exists between these different elements, how these different elements coordinate with each other, how well they are able to fit into each other, and how they stand apart from each other. This is the function of a critic while he is analyzing the poem. Otherwise, Brooks admits few will agree that poetry is the language of paradox because the latter defines the hard, bright, and witty discourse of sophistry, not that of the soul, which is mainly emotive. What happened was that before Saint Brooks explained to us the function of paradox, paradox was not considered a very well taken literary device. Paradox was usually supposed to be part of a kind of poem, which were considered to be more literary and more cultured than the kind of poetry which was supposed to be popular among people. Paradox was supposed to be part of only urban poetry. Paradox was supposed to be part of the kind of poems which Alexander Pope wrote and not William Wordsworth. You know, Alexander Pope wrote poems about the upper class cultured strata of the society, which was an urban audience to which he talked about. So, you William Wordsworth was not supposed to give due weightage to paradox in his poetry because it was supposed that the poetry of William Wordsworth is spontaneous, it's more about nature, it's more about simple vocations of simple people. Since he, one second, there was disconnection. Okay, so we were discussing how paradox was supposed to be part of the poetry of William Wordsworth and other romantic poets, and not sorry. Paradox was supposed to be not part of William Wordsworth and other romantic poets, and was supposed to be part of the poetry of Alexander Pope and other neoclassical poets, because it was supposed that paradox uh, was an attribute of an urban poetry, a sophisticated poetry, which gave more emphasis on cultural aspects as compared to the nature or the simplicity or the naturality. Uh, Book says that when we consider the statement that poetry is the language of paradox, we are not agreeing with the usual discussion of paradox as part of a kind of poem which gives images of hard, bright, witty discourses. In usual criticism, before Paint books, it was supposed that paradox could not be part of romantic poetry. Paradox can only be part of neoclassical and other kind of poetry, which usually talked about language games and witty dialogues, and which talked about urban experiences and plays with language and such things. Paradox was not supposed to be part of emotional and sentimental poetry or the nature poetry, which was supposed to be the domain of William Wordsworth and other romantic poets. Okay, so this we should keep in the mind that paradox in its usual definition was not supposed to be part of universal poetry or the romantic poetry, which was considered to be more close to nature and natural experiences, and was supposed to be simple enough to say whatever you want to say in simple language. Brooks lays out his argument for the centrality of paradox by demonstrating that paradox is the language appropriate and inevitable to poetry. Brooks says that Paradox is central part of every poem because it is part of the language in which poetry is written, and it is inevitable. You cannot escape it. No poem can be written without a paradox within its structure. Paradox will be there whether the poet wants it or not. Because the art of writing poetry is really art of creating paradoxes. The argument is based on the contention that referential language. What is referential language? Referential language means dictionary language, something which refers, something which is denotative. Referential language is too vague for the specific message a poet expresses. He says that every kind of language we have has some kind of innate weaknesses. The weakness is that our experience is perhaps more complex, and language and its dictionary and its expressions are perhaps too simple to express that experience into words. In a way, language is always insufficient to express what we feel. Sometimes in usual discussion, we usually say that this is not what I mean to say, or this is not I wanted to say. How can you explain this phenomenon? It means that language is bound to be inadequate for the richness of human experience, and since language always tries to incorporate ideas and feelings into images, so there is always a mismatch between the feeling, the experience, and uh, its use, and its conversion into the words and the symbols. He says every good poet makes up his language as he goes. It means that every good poet has to create his own language because a good poet finds language insufficient to express what he wants to say. Language is always inadequate for the sensitivity of a good poet, for the experiences of a good poet. And since most of our experiences are felt in the form of paradoxes, they are not very simple to express. They are far richer and far multiple to express in words. Every poet has to create a language, create words, create expressions to adequately represent what he wants to say. This book argues is because words are mutable and meaning shifts when words are placed in relation to one another. When you come to the theory of language, you understand that words are contextual. Words are modified when placed in company of other words. A sentence is a string of words, but this is not a simple string of words. Every word modifies and gives meaning according to its company, means in which context it is placed. So language becomes a game. Language becomes, a kind of activity in which there is always a mismatch between the expression, the experience, and the communication. So words modify, their meanings are modified when they are placed in relation to one another in a sentence or in a paragraph. So it creates a kind of disjunction between the meaning and the experience. Clint Booth takes certain examples and explains two poems of William Wordsworth and finds out how paradoxes are part of even the simple poetry of William Wordsworth. Using works from William Wordsworth to Shakespeare, book shows how the only way some ideas can be expressed is through paradox. So he takes certain points, explains them, and tries to convince us for his thesis that paradoxes are found in all kind of poetry, and poems can be written only through paradoxes. His best example of this idea is from Coleridge's description of imagination. Firstly, he talks about what Coleridge and how Coleridge defines imagination. According to H.T. Coleridge, Imagination reveals itself in the balance or reconciliation of opposite discordant qualities. Estiquoli says that imagination is a combination, a collection of opposite qualities. It puts together sameness with difference, of the general with concrete. Imagination brings together opposite things. Imagination creates a structure in which seemingly opposite experiences are put together. Imagination is a power which reconciles oppositions, which brings together opposite ideas, opposite things together, and tries to find some kind of similarity or some kind of sameness within them. This is how imagination works according to Descartes. So we see that even in this definition of imagination, there is a lot of scope for for paradoxes to play. All this definition of imagination is about paradoxes, balance, reconciliation and opposition, sameness and difference, general and concrete. These are opposite notions, and imagination puts together these opposite notions. So, to begin with, Philip Brooks talks about how imagination can be seen only through a paradox, because imagination is a power which puts together opposite things, which brings opposite ideas together, things which do not seem to have any relation with each other. These things are put together, and the relations are, you know, are discovered among them. William Wordsworth, for example, as Cambridge points out, let the intention of paradox be read in his poetry when he admitted that his purpose was to choose incidents and situations from common life. You know, it's about a well-known pact between S.T. Coleridge and William Wordsworth. It is said that when William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge started writing their lyrical ballads, the poetry, the collection of poems which became very famous, they had a kind of agreement. And the agreement was that William Wordsworth will choose incidents and situations from common life, and he will present them in an uncommon aspect, while S.T. Coleridge will choose incidents and situations which seem uncommon, unusual, supernatural, and he will present them in an ordinary way. Perhaps we discussed in the last semester also that Wordsworth tried to make common into uncommon, while S.T. Coleridge tried to make uncommon into common. So we see that even this common becoming uncommon and uncommon becoming common in itself is paradox. So, as, so Philip Brooks points out that even in the initial intention of William Wordsworth, we can find a paradox, because he wanted to choose situations from common life, and then he wanted to present them in an unusual aspect. So common is becoming uncommon, while S.T. Coleridge tried to choose situations which seem uncommon, and he tried to present them in a common or original way, in a natural way. So even this statement of William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge can be taken as part of paradox. Uh, then we will come to discussion of two of William Wordsworth's poems. First is It's a Beauteous Evening, Calm and Free, and second is Composed on Westminster Bridge. Okay, I have sent you a copy of my PPT presentation on your Google Classroom, right? Just try to see that, and we will discuss these poems. कल अब जब आप आएंगे तो हम इन poems को discuss करेंगे और कैसे एस टी कॉलेज कैसे ब्रुक्स इन poems के अंदर पैराडॉक्स को डिस्कवर करता है। तो मैं एक्सपेक्ट करता हूँ कि दो poems का टेक्स्ट जो मैंने आपके पास भेजा है, पीपीटी भी भेजी है मैंने आपके पास, आप अपने गूगल क्लासरूम में जाइए और उसमें आपको पीपीटी मिलेगी, उसमें पॉइंट्स के टेक्स्ट को पढ़िएगा और थोड़ा सा आइडिया लेकर आइएगा कि पॉइंट्स किस बारे में। ओके, कल तो हम क्लास नहीं लगाएंगे। अब नेक्स्ट हमारी क्लास रहेगी मंडे को। ओके।